Thank you very much. So this talk is actually an awesome time because right before it they started serving beer, which makes this a very good talk slot. But first I want to do a quick sobriety test because I think a few of you have been drinking. So would you please clap at the exact instant when you see my hands that are perfectly together like this, but not before. Ready? It's getting better. We're approaching consensus. Oh. Okay. Well, you failed the sobriety test, I'm afraid. But a good effort nonetheless. So this talk is called Frequently Asked Questions. And for this talk, I want you to know that everyone has a job. So this talk is mostly targeted at beginner and intermediate programmers, but everyone in the audience has a job. So if you are a beginner or an intermediate, your job is to listen and hopefully learn. If you are an advanced programmer, your job is to listen and hopefully disagree with me. And the reason I want you to disagree with me is one of my favorite things in the world is when smart people disagree with me. And they tell me what they're thinking, and we sort of both get to learn a lot from that. So I love questions during my talk. It's one of my favorite things. My second favorite thing is being heckled during my talk. So whichever you're more into, feel free to do that one. So let's start immediately. So the question I get most frequently from people is, how can I improve as a programmer? How do we get better at this craft? And the first thing I say is something that Avdi touched on already, which is you should pair with other programmers. And I didn't say pair with better programmers. I said pair with other programmers. And I thought Avdi made this point perfectly. When you pair with someone better than you, you learn a lot because they can teach you things directly. And that's awesome. When you pair with someone who's not quite as strong as you get the chance to learn by teaching. So you learn a lot in both situations. Now, in medical school, they have this awesome phrase where they talk about learning how to do a new procedure. And they say, first you watch one, then you do one, then you teach one. And then you have it learned. I think if we can apply a lot of that to programming as well. So that's the first thing. If you want to improve as a programmer, pair with others. There's no better, higher bandwidth way to get better. The next thing is still do plenty of struggling on your own. And I say struggling very intentionally. So something I think that it's easy to forget or get away from is the fact that this stuff is really hard. Programming is super hard. And people, particularly when they're new, they feel like something is probably wrong with them because of how hard this stuff seems. And I want everyone to know and acknowledge and talk about a little bit more that this is actually really hard for everybody. I struggle all the time. So if you are new, don't be discouraged. It's not you. This stuff is actually just really difficult. I spend entire days on stupid problems, things that are, should have been ridiculously obvious to me, and I beat myself up over a little bit. So you should realize that this is common. This is not you. So if you're improving, pair with others. Do plenty of struggling on your own, and admit you don't understand something when you don't understand it. This, I think, is one of my superpowers. This is something that I adopted about 1.5 years ago. I said, you know what? When someone says something and I don't get it or I don't understand, I'm just going to say it. I'm going to admit it right away. And we work in an industry that, for better or for worse, is intellect-powered, right? Our measurement, our judgment of each other is typically based on how smart we think the other person is. And so there's this strong temptation to create this image of always knowing what's going on, of always having it together. And I think that's very much to our detriment. You will see me readily admit when I don't understand something. And so here's the thing. Say someone tries to explain something to you and they want you to get it, but you haven't gotten it yet, and you don't want to annoy them or seem not that smart. So you're like, oh yeah, I totally got that. What you've done in that instance is you've traded the opportunity to learn something and permanently understand it for a temporary perception that you understand it. And I think doing this will just hurt you so much. This is one of these things that I've adopted as like a personal motto and has been so huge for my development as a programmer. By the way, there's an awesome heuristic that you should be running in your head all the time. When you are super embarrassed to admit that you don't understand something is the time it's most important to do it. Because you're probably right, because you have this voice in your head which is like, wow, I really should know this. And you're right, you really should. So you should admit that and get it cleared up. People that make fun of you or give you a hard time when you admit ignorance on something are bad people. Thank you. Seriously. The problem, when that happens, the problem is with them. It is not with you. They have screwed up. I've talked to and interacted with a lot of amazing people that I'm a little intimidated to admit ignorance in front of, but when I do, they always respond the best. I found that the best programmers are the ones that are most willing to acknowledge that this just happens. It's a hard thing, and no one can know everything, so it's totally okay to admit when you don't know it. Okay, so we have improving as a programmer, we have pairing with others, better and worse, we have struggling on your own, we have admitting when you don't understand, and so that's a really good start. If you embrace those things and do those things actively, you will improve a lot as a programmer, and it will happen quickly. But what's a good heuristic for knowing if you're succeeding? How do you actually look at yourself and be like, am I a better programmer? Is the code that I'm writing much better than it used to be? And I have one heuristic that I like better than all the others. There's a number that you could apply here, of course. But my favorite heuristic for code quality, how I'm doing as a programmer, is how easy is it to change my code? How flexible is the code that you've written when you go to change it later? So you can look at some code you just wrote, and you can make some statements about it. You can say, I think these methods are pretty well named. I think they're very short. I think my classes are tight and focused. And that is all well and good. You can do some evaluation of code right after you've written it, but the real test of code comes 3 months later when you need to change something. That is the most important heuristic as a programmer. So that's the thing that I think you should pay attention to. Watch out for what it's like to change code that you've written. And make sure you bring yourself up a level of abstraction and observe yourself changing that code. And ask yourself, am I struggling? Is it easy? Am I getting right back in that mindset, right back into the headspace where I know where everything is? Or is it difficult? I want to make this change. Am I having to make this change in a bunch of different places, which indicates I had duplication? Or do I just change it in one place and I'm done? Pay attention to that. That to me is the best heuristic we have. So we pair with others, we struggle on our own, we admit when we don't understand, we apply the heuristic of how easy our code is to change. Those are the big ones. I think those are those most important pillars. And now I want to talk about something that I think it seems deceptively small, but I think is actually a big part of why I'm a better programmer today than I used to be. And I'm going to start with a question. What does this command do? Do you hear other people thinking out loud? Yes. So it reaches through my history. So history tells you all the commands, the last some certain number of commands you've run. I pipe this through a very simple awk thing, which basically counts up the occurrences, and then we sort in reverse order, and we grab the first 20. And it looks like this for me. Oh, I'm off the screen. Let's grab 15 instead. 14. There we go. Okay. So, I run this command periodically to see how I'm doing, and how I'm doing in terms of typing too much. So, as programmers, our primary task, right, physically, is this motion right here, right? But this motion right here is all wasted time. The act of typing occurs when you already know what you want to do. So you look at the code and you think, I want the code to look like this now. And so you start typing and a timer starts. And all this time where you're typing is wasted time. This is the time where you have to go through these silly muscle motions to inform this extremely fast processor what you want it to do. And so I want to take that time and minimize it all the time. I'm constantly looking for ways to shave small amounts of keystrokes and time off my workflow. And this is one way I do it. So G is an alias for Git. And I prefer G to Git because it's substantially shorter. Now notice that I'm kind of dumb and I still type Git sometimes, which is hilarious. So I've typed G 953 times out of the last something, 20,000 commands or something. That's pretty crazy. But G is my alias for Git. It's actually a function. It has a little more fanciness than that. Git is me forgetting that G alias exists. So one thing I do when I bind a shortcut like an alias like G is I'll often remap the full-length command like git to say use G. And you very quickly, well, you hate yourself for a little bit, and you're like, ah, and then you learn it, and you get it in there. So I'm pretty happy with the output of this command because most of these are actually aliases that I've created. So G is pretty short, git is me forgetting. Vim, that should really be V, honestly. CD is not so bad. GAD, this is a git shortcut. Git add add the entire directory. Git cm, git commit with a message. Code, go to my code directory. Git diff, git checkout, git history. U goes up a directory. CD dot dot. I like that one a lot. G push, I've recently aliased to GP, and then alias G push to say use GP. So I was like, well, git push is too long. Well, I'll do G push. Well, that's actually pretty long too, so why don't we make this GP? So this is not an amazing testament to my abilities. This one right here, by the way, hiding at the bottom, this A right here is my favorite. This is ls-lrth. Yeah, that's my favorite. That's probably the best one there. So this stuff seems stupid, and in a way it kind of is. But I think it actually has a pretty big impact over the years and years that I've done this. So these are just my shell aliases that I use to check this way. I have about 60 Vim leader commands. I use probably about 40 of them regularly. I am a relentless aliaser and rebinder and shortcut maker and little script writer. And the first couple times you do it, it barely saves you much time at all, although it's really satisfying. We're programmers. Like, this just tickles a part of your brain. You use 2 keystrokes where you could have used 3. Like, you are awesome. You feel pretty good. But it actually adds up pretty fast. My dot files are like, yeah, I'll get 1 second. My dot files are, my vimrc is now like 10 years old. Like, this thing has been growing over time, and it's sort of my secret sauce. I'm eventually going to pass this on to my children. Let them benefit from all my years of struggle. What was your question or comment? How can I pair with other people? That's an awesome question. I'm the worst person to pair with in the world. So 3 reasons. 1, I use Dvorak. So the hack I found around this is I have a keyboard that has its own hardware memory, so I can put it in QWERTY mode, and I can put it in Dvorak and plug it into their computer and income the right keystrokes. So Dvorak is one problem. The other problem is this stuff. This stuff is bound in my muscles like you would not believe, so it's really hard for me. And then the last thing is I remap caps lock to escape. So imagine in Vim, you think you've left insert mode, and what you've done instead is flipped all your commands to be the capital letter version, and you're totally hosed. So I have traded, so this admittedly is suboptimal for pairing. I've traded portability for efficiency when I'm at home. And so I struggle a little bit when I pair with people, but for me, this is worth it. And it's after a half hour or so, I can kind of get into the groove of whatever local setup I'm using. But that's a great question. This is a trade-off. By the way, this to me is like one of those people. I get a lot of mentee questions of people I'm mentoring, and they're like, when should I use this, like integration tests versus unit tests? And people always want these answers that are like, this is when you should use a unit test. This is when you should use an integration test. This is when you should extract an object. This is how long methods should be. And the truth is, in software engineering and most of the world, what we're paid to do is to manage trade-offs. So sometimes integration tests are better, and sometimes unit tests are better. They have certain pros and cons. All the patterns that you've learned or will learn have pros and cons. These different styles have pros and cons. And the reason we get paid the big bucks is because we get to use our knowledge and our intuition and our judgment and apply them to these problems and make the right call, the best call that we can at that time. So my trade-off here is efficiency locally, and I'm happy to make that trade. Is there anybody here that is currently looking for their first Ruby or Rails job? You liars, I know there's at least one. There's one, yeah. Okay. Since there's only one of you, we should chat afterwards. So I'm going to skip this question, but let's talk about it. This is something, so this mentoring happens as part of, we have a service at thoughtbot called Learn, where we teach developers. And our top plan includes one-on-one mentoring. That's where these questions are coming from. So they're mostly sort of Ruby and Rails people trying to start their first project, trying to get into the market. And so that's the reason that was on there. So whether or not you are currently looking for a job, it's incredibly powerful and useful to have friends in the Ruby community. And that's one of the reasons these conferences are so great. Making legitimate friends, the word for networking is really just a word for making friends legitimately. When you're faking it, it's not nearly as good. And these conferences are great for that. And so I actually want to take a minute, and I'd like you to turn to your left or your right, depending on who you know least, and introduce yourself to that person and have a quick conversation. Go ahead. Okay. All right, excellent. So, your sociable group. So I have an important question for you, and I need a show of hands for this question. How many people here already forget the name of the person they just met? Raise your hands. Come on, you liars. There it is. Turn and reintroduce yourselves. Get your names. Swap the name. Remember this time. Okay, good. All right. So, now you have a job. So your job, now that you've made a new Ruby friend, is to remember their name, which I've just helped you with quite a bit. A little mnemonic might be a good idea. And also, to say hi to them later. So the most important stage you're in right now is the sort of like the tadpole friendship stage. You've had a short conversation, but you're not really buddies yet. So next time you see that person, be like, hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? Use their name. That will help you remember it later. And just help solidify this thing over time. But this is what conferences are great for. You should be doing this, by the way. You should be making new friends at a conference. This should be your heuristic for conference success, is new connections with people. One of my favorite questions that I get from people is, do you think I'm underpaid? Am I underpaid? And my answer is, yes, you are. And I'm confident saying yes to that, and I don't even say it facetiously, I say it truthfully, because you're underpaid if you think you are. The most important thing that your compensation package can do for you is to make you forget about your compensation package and not think about it. If salary is a concern, if you feel undervalued, if you feel like you're delivering more than you're getting back, that is when you are underpaid. And that's based on your own assessment of it. So when people ask me, am I underpaid? I say, yes, I think you are. If you're worried about it, you are underpaid. Now, what can you do about this? Well, here's, I think, the best thing you can do. You can talk to your coworkers about how much money they make. Now, this blows some people's minds. There's sort of a weird social taboo, at least in the US, I think, and probably in Europe a little bit as well. Yep, this guy's confirming, getting some nods. So yes, in Europe as well, there's this weird taboo where it's like, you can't talk about money with your coworkers. And like the company will work to sort of keep your salary secret from each other. Now this is kind of weird, right? So imagine that I am $15,000 underpaid. I'm $15,000 below a fair market rate for myself. All my other coworkers are making $15,000 more. They're all paid at market rate. I'm the unfortunate here. So I go to my boss and I'm like, I'm underpaid. And he's like, okay. I'm like, I want to make $5,000 more. And he goes, okay. You earned it. And I'm like, yes, killed it. I'm still $10,000 underpaid. I don't know about it. Why did I lose that negotiation? I don't know. There's an information asymmetry. I have less knowledge than the person I'm negotiating against, right? Your boss knows the salary of everyone in the company. You only know yours most of the time. He wins. There's been studies, economic studies, that prove with science that the person with more more knowledge in a negotiation has an advantage. I don't know how they prove this, but hey. I have a friend, he's a PhD, he told me, he's like, trust me, it's legit. So, PhDs never lie, they're never wrong. So we have this taboo, and this taboo is kind of weird, but most importantly, this taboo hurts you and helps your employer. And that's a bummer. So, I think we should be much more willing to discuss our salaries with our coworkers. I think we should get rid of this taboo. I don't think it helps us. I think it actively hurts us, and I think we should get around it. Now, it's a weird social situation, right? It's weird to just walk up to your friend and be like, so, how much you making? So I gave this talk a couple weeks ago at ArrrrCamp and brainstormed with some people afterwards, and there was a bunch of coworkers got together, and everyone wrote down their number on a piece of paper and put it in a hat. And they mixed it up, and they pulled them out and read it one by one. And so no one knows who makes what, but suddenly you know the whole picture. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing kind of awesome. Or not. But this is good to know, right? This is useful information. And this way you can sort of get it out there without having that awkward situation. So ideally, you're just really good friends with someone and you ask them. But I think this works equally well. By the way, I can't speak for Europe, but the US government actually agrees with me. So your right to discuss your salary and your entire compensation package with your coworkers is protected by law. It's legally protected. And this got passed a long time ago, over 100 years ago, as part of labor reform. So this was legislation that was meant to protect unions and the ability for people to unionize, to organize. And one of the techniques companies used to prevent these unions from forming was to disallow them from discussing their compensation. So suddenly you cannot do collective bargaining as a union, which is one of the most powerful things a union can do, is to bargain as a whole. And so there's actually legal protection for this. I can't speak to Europe, who knows, but there's some support for this, that this is an important right. So I think we should take full advantage and get more money, get paid more, don't be underpaid. Last time I gave this talk, someone raised their hand and said, how much money do you make? And I said, I wish I could answer that. The thing is, your right to discuss your salary with people outside your company is not protected. And you could conceivably make a case that that's proprietary information, right? That's sort of like a company secret almost, how much it costs to manufacture their products by paying their employees. So I would love to just blurt out my number and give you all an anchor point here to see what you're thinking, or to sort of measure yourself against. But I cannot. But if you ask me in private, I might tell you. Oh, awesome. Okay, so let's talk about TDD. TDD is one of these things that scare people. There are a couple things that scare people in programming. One is Vim, and the other is TDD. I don't know exactly why this is, but they both have this rap of being super hard and super scary. And so how do you learn TDD? How do you get over this fear? Actually, how many people consistently practice TDD, as in 95% of the time they do? Interesting, and so the rest of you do not. Fascinating, okay. So I'm sure you're sick to death, the people that don't practice TDD, of this talk. However, I'm going to throw in one more plug for TDD. It changed my life. It's the best thing I ever started doing for my programming career, ever. It's the most important change I ever made. So there's that. So let's say I've convinced you, and you want to try TDD. The first step is don't be intimidated by it. It's not that bad. It's not so scary. Neither is Vim, by the way. The best thing to do to learn how to TDD is to pair program with someone. If you spend a couple hours working with someone that's done it before and asking them questions and watching how they do it live, you're going to be golden. Now, you're going to be golden-ish. What's going to happen is you're going to start it on your own, and you're going to come into a roadblock. And you're going to be like, oh, this is kind of hard to test. And so a couple things can happen at this point. You're like, I'm having trouble testing this. So what does that mean? Well, some of that is your inexperience, right? You haven't done this before, you don't know how to do it. But some of that is actually really, really valuable feedback. One of the best things about trying to test code is it tells you when it's hard to test. And code that is hard to test is bad code. I really think that's true. If your code is hard to test, something let's say bad. It has potential problems. It's a smell. So code smell is a great term to know. It's something that indicates there could be a problem. It is not necessarily a problem in its own. But code that's hard to test is definitely a smell. So when you come across this situation where you're having trouble testing it, first ask yourself, am I having trouble doing TDD here because of the code I've written? Is there some way I can change the production code to make it easier to test? And yes, that is what you should do. Yes, that is worth doing. People say, don't ever change your code just to be easier to test. Yes, you should change your code to be easier to test. That's one of the best things about TDD, is it's a positive design pressure. It exerts a good pressure on the code that makes it better in the end. So one is, see if you can change the code. Two is, don't worry about it. I'm hesitant to say this to people that are new to it, but every once in a while, one time out of 1,000, I look at a situation and I say, this code is not hard to test because of something I'm done. It's not a code smell. It's hard to test because of something out of my control, and therefore I'm not going to test it. I'm going to weigh the pros and cons, like I do every day with every decision I make, and I'm going to say, this little bit right here is not going to get tested. I'm right back on the TDD bandwagon for the next thing I do, but this little bit right here is not worth the effort. So knowing that you have this escape clause, know that you have these two strategies, 999 times out of 1,000, you're going to do the one where you're going to change the code and make it easier to test. And that one time in 1,000 where you're just like, I can't do this, it's okay. Put it down, move on, don't get blocked, come back to it, or even just leave it untested. Every once in a while, that's okay. Some is better than none. Okay. How many people here are Vim users? Awesome. How many people here want to be Vim users? Aspiring Vim users? One person. Yeah, some people, a little bit. My advice for switching to Vim for people, most people, at sort of a beginner and intermediate level, is don't do it. Yeah, and I say this as a guy that's been using Vim for like a decade now and love it to death, have given talks just on Vim. Don't do it at first. When you're feeling a little lost, when you're still a little intimidated by the stuff you're trying to learn, Vim is not important. Vim is an optimization. You don't need to prematurely optimize your editor speed in the beginning. You need to optimize your learning speed at first, and then later come back to that editor speed. So the first thing I say is don't learn Vim. The next thing I say is use Vim tutor. If you go to a shell and you type Vim tutor, it launches, there we go. It launches Vim, and it has a text file in it that tells you how to learn it. And now because my resolution is ridiculous, this looks all messy, but this is in fact a very unintimidating document, which teaches you in very small steps, very easily, how to use Vim. And it's pretty great. So use that approach. Start with Vim Tutor. I wrote a post called Surviving Your First Week in Vim. If you Google that, that'll come up, and that has some other thoughts for you on there. I want to take a second and have some questions from you guys, though. I've sort of simplified all the questions and answers. I'd like a few questions from you. Why did I start using Vim? Because I watched someone who knew what they were doing use it. I think that's what catches a lot of people. I had a friend that was a really good programmer, and I was doing like some Java work in Eclipse or something, and he was like, oh man, you gotta use Vim. I was like, yeah, and he's like, watch this. I was just like, oh my goodness. Vim lets you operate on text at a higher level of abstraction. It gives you a programming language for editing text. It's amazing. Once you get the hang of it, you'll never go back to a non-modal editor, I think. Yeah. Emacs is great too. Emacs is awesome too. There are things in Emacs I wish Vim had. I wish I could program Vim in Lisp desperately. Emacs is basically just a Lisp program that happens to edit text. It's a beautiful thing. You can program it using Lisp. You can rewire parts of it without restarting it. It's like this incredible thing. Emacs is awesome too. It's not as good at, I think it is not as good at like editing per keystroke. You have to type a little bit more with Emacs to get stuff done. You also have to do some key combinations, which are not pleasant for me. And so overall, I'm a speed demon, so Vim wins out for me. Yeah? I'll show you, yeah, good. The question was, what's my favorite trick in Vim? Let me show you a couple right now. So the first thing is relative number. This is my embarrassingly large user class. It's awful. So the first is relative number. So notice what number my cursor is on, what line number? It's always 0. Do you see the line numbers on the left in the blue? Yeah. So let's say I realize this class is too bloated, therefore I'm going to delete all these associations. So what I can see from here is that there are 7 associations, right? Because I am on line 0, and down line 6 is all of the associations. So I can say 6DD, whoops, 7DD, obviously, 7DD, and blow them all away at once. I can also, let's say I'm down here, and I want to change this where, for instance. And I can see right now that, the where that is down in the find by auth hash method, 5 lines below here, 6 lines below here. So I can say 6J, whoops, 5J, 5J, and jump right down to that line. And it's very easy to type short commands like that. It's like, actually, let's get rid of this whole method right here, including the new line below it, 4DD. That sort of thing. So I love relative number. Big fan of relative number. Oh, another awesome thing is text obj Ruby block. This is a plugin by Drew Neal. He made Vimcasts. And he basically gives you, what does he give you? He gives you Ruby blocks as a text object. So I can say, this is a block right here. I can say delete inside Ruby, dir. Delete inside Ruby block, dir. Change inside Ruby block. That's a handy one. I like that a lot. I want a better one. Let's see. Yeah, this whole block needs to change. Change inside CIR. Oops, CIR. Yep. Change it just like that. Relative number, Ruby text obj Ruby block. Pretty awesome stuff. By the way, I wasn't lying when I said that I'm like a crazy rebinder and whatnot. Anyway, these are my leader commands starting here. These are all shortcuts that I use pretty frequently. Fortunately, there's nothing too embarrassing here. But this is me like every day, rebinding a few things and just paying attention. A couple more. This is part of the reason I'm able to get stuff done quickly. I've been taking these rough edges of my environment and shaving them down for like 8 to 10 years. This is my legacy. Other questions? Is this on GitHub? Yeah, it is. My username on GitHub is r00k. My dot files are up there. You can steal all these. You people, it's funny because I've been stealing things from other people's GitHubs or dot files for years, and then I'll get these notifications on GitHub as like, ooh, copied this thing from, thanks, Rook. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I didn't invent leader commands. I stole that from somebody else who probably stole it from somebody else. It's a long and noble tradition. But if you want to thank me when you steal something from there, that's totally cool. It'll light up my day a little bit. Other question? Yeah. I'll do him first and then you next. Sorry, go ahead. Do I have mentors? That is such a good question. I wish I did. I have some people, there are a few people at work that I very much look up to in a programming capacity that I think are awesome, and I'm constantly trying to like copy more of their brain into my own. So from a programming standpoint, I would say yes. More and more of my day involves sort of running the Learn business at thoughtbot, and in that way I don't really have mentors. So I was just talking to Anthony Eden today about like I kind of need like a mentor on this side of my life. But I think mentorship is really important, and so I'm seeking this person, trying to find this out. That's a good question. In the back? Was that your question too? Anybody? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The gist of that was when you pretend you know something, you don't just hurt yourself, you hurt the person trying to teach you. They're like, oh, I've had success with this method for teaching. And they really haven't. And you're deceiving them. Yeah. Let's do one last question. And then we're going to wrap up and go to dinner. Actually, two. I see two hands. I'll do those. Two. Did you really? So this guy yanked the keys off his MacBook and replaced them when he was trying to use Dvorak, which is void your warranty in about 300 ways, which is awesome. I didn't do that. My keyboard looks like a normal QWERTY keyboard. I touch type. I just learned where my fingers are supposed to go and where the keys should be, and so I don't actually look down at the keyboard when I'm doing. And for every once in a while, for like keyboard shortcuts that are kind of weird, I know oh, looks like it's a B, but it's really an X, and so I'll just. This is why I'm the worst person to pair with ever. Everyone's like, oh, so, oh, why? Start learning Dvorak? Yes, I printed out a copy of the keyboard and put it next to it, and then just was really, really slow for a little while. Basically, this is in college. I didn't know how to touch type QWERTY. I was like, well, if I'm going to learn to touch type, I may as well try a different layout that's like supposedly more efficient. And I don't know if I exactly regret it, but I wouldn't exactly recommend it. It's kind of nice from a RSI, repetitive stress injury standpoint. You definitely do move your fingers less per word. There's fewer miles of key travel because you stay on the home row more. But the lack of portability is a real pain. It's kind of tough. So I'm not sure it's worth the trade-off. If you're having RSI issues, definitely. Otherwise, not so much. By the way, if you're having RSI issues, you need to get yourself a Kinesis Advantage Pro. Kinesis Advantage, it's awesome. The most important thing it does is it puts backspace and command and control and all that stuff on your thumbs, as opposed to like these sort of like long reaches with your pinkies that sort of give you this weird pronation and like this awkward pinky situation. It's like, oh yeah, they're on these really strong fingers right here. It's an awesome keyboard. It's a split, but with the important stuff on your thumbs. Specialized in Vim how? Yeah. Yep. So this guy is trying to get me to switch to an even more customized keyboard layout that will be available nowhere. That's a good idea. I like where your head's at. I like how hardcore that idea is. But I already have this Dvorak thing that's already a big pain, so I don't know. Why don't we wrap up there? Let's go to dinner. It's been awesome talking to you guys. Thank you so much for your attention.